The void shark broke free of its tank with a sound like glass tearing, and the entire banquet hall of the Vorthal Ascendancy dissolved into screaming chaos. I was standing near the back wall with a drink in my hand 1 second, and the next second a creature the size of a transport shuttle was thrashing across marble floors soaked in its own tank water, teeth the length of my forearm snapping at anything that moved. Nobles in silk robes tripped over their own trains. A Kroll war marshal who could bench press a ceremonial column was frozen solid, too stunned to act. The Dravith prince who had brought the beast as a gift stood there shouting orders that nobody followed, because nobody in that glittering room of 100 species had ever been trained for a real emergency. They had been trained for performance, not for this. I dropped my glass and moved. There was no time to think about protocol, no time to remember that I was just a human soldier, assigned to stand quietly near the food table so Earth would look polite at the Unity Gala. The princess, Aelshira of House Caltrin, was on the ground near the overturned tank, her ceremonial gown tangled around her legs, and the shark was turning toward her with the slow, terrible patience of something that already knew it had won. I got between them. I did not have a weapon. Soldiers were not permitted sidearms inside the royal hall, some rule about trust and diplomacy that had sounded reasonable an hour ago, and now felt like a joke with a very bad punchline. What I had was a serving tray I grabbed off a fleeing waiter's cart, and about 2 seconds to decide what to do with it. The shark lunged. I swung the tray into its jaw hard enough to feel the impact travel up both arms into my shoulders, and the creature veered sideways, crashing into a marble pillar instead of into the princess. Stone cracked. Dust rained down. The whole hall seemed to hold its breath in 100 different ways, from nobles with gasping vocal folds, to Sithari diplomats whose silence read as horror in every color their skin could flash. "Move," I said to her, not waiting to see if she understood the word, just grabbing her arm and hauling her upright and behind me. "I do not take orders from soldiers," she said, breathless, more from shock than defiance. "Then take a suggestion." "Move." She moved. The shark righted itself, shaking dust and blood from its skull, and its many eyes fixed on me now instead of her, which was exactly what I wanted, and also exactly the kind of decision that gets people killed in stories told after the fact. I backed toward the overturned tank, keeping my body between the creature and the princess, scanning the ruined hall for anything useful. The chandelier overhead was already swinging loose from the earlier impact, its crystal housing cracked. The tank itself lay on its side, a curved wall of reinforced glass, empty now, but still whole. "Get behind the tank," I told her. "It'll hold if it charges again." "And what will you do?" "Make sure it charges at me instead." She did not argue this time. She scrambled behind the glass wall, and I planted my feet in the open space between her and 11 feet of furious sea predator that had never been meant to breathe air, let alone rampage through a royal banquet. It was suffering. That much I understood immediately. Whatever the Dravith prince had done to capture it, whatever drugs or restraints had kept it docile in that tank, all of it had worn off the moment the glass gave way, and now it was in pain and it was angry and it did not care who stood in front of it. I did not blame the animal. I blamed the fool who thought a suffering creature made a good gift. It charged. I threw myself sideways, rolling across broken glass and spilled water, feeling a shard bite into my palm as I pushed off the ground and back to my feet. The shark's tail whipped through the space where I had been standing, shattering a banquet table into kindling. Somewhere behind me I heard the Kroll marshal finally shouting for the royal guard, but the guards were still 40 seconds out at best, according to the frantic chatter coming through my earpiece. And 40 seconds was a long time when you were sharing a room with something built to kill. I needed a weapon. I needed something with weight and reach. The ceremonial column the marshal had failed to lift earlier was lying cracked on the floor, too heavy for me to swing, but beside it was a length of decorative rail, gold-plated, thin, meant for nothing more dangerous than holding up drapery. It would have to do. I grabbed it and turned in time to see the shark coming again, and this time I did not dodge. I planted my back foot, gripped the rail like a spear, and drove it forward into the soft tissue beneath the creature's jaw, using its own momentum against it. The rail bent nearly in half but held long enough to turn the charge, sending the shark skidding sideways into another pillar, this one already weakened from the first impact. The pillar groaned. Cracks spread up toward the ceiling in jagged lines, and I understood with sudden clarity what was about to happen a full second before it did. "Everyone out," I shouted, my voice carrying in a way I did not know it could until that moment. "Ceilings coming down. Move now." Nobles who moments earlier had been too dignified to run, suddenly found their legs. The hall emptied in a stampede of silk and scales and chitin, servants and diplomats and warriors alike, shoving through the tall doors at the far end, and I turned back to find the princess still crouched behind the glass tank, watching me instead of running. I said move, I told her again. I am not leaving you here alone with that thing. There was no time to argue about royal stubbornness. The shark was recovering, shaking off the second impact, and above us, the cracked ceiling was shedding small pieces of stone that clattered against the floor like a warning countdown. I grabbed her by the wrist and pulled her toward a side archway, away from the collapsing pillar, away from the thrashing animal, and we made it 3 steps before the shark cut off our path entirely, blocking the archway with its bulk. We were trapped between a dying ceiling and an animal that did not know it was dying too. I looked around the ruined hall for anything at all, and my eyes landed on the tank's release valve, still attached to a length of hose that had been used to fill the thing with water in the first place. If I could get water flowing again, even a little, it might calm the creature enough to buy us time. Sharks like this one were not built for air. Every second out of water was agony for it, and agony made it dangerous, but it also made it desperate for relief. Cover your ears, I told the princess, and before she could ask why, I grabbed the hose, wrenched the valve open, and blasted a jet of pressurized water directly into the creature's face. It recoiled, disoriented, and for one precious moment, it stopped hunting and simply existed in relief, water running over gills that had been dry and burning for too long. I did not waste the moment. I grabbed the princess again and we ran, ducking under its tail, sprinting past the crumbling pillar just as it finally gave way behind us with a sound like thunder, sealing the archway shut with rubble and dust. We burst into the corridor beyond, coughing, covered in dust and water and someone spilled wine, and collapsed against the far wall as royal guards finally came pouring past us toward the sealed hall, weapons drawn, shouting orders to contain whatever remained inside. The princess sat beside me on the cold floor, her ceremonial gown ruined beyond repair, her elaborate hair falling loose around her face. For a long moment neither of us spoke. My hand was bleeding from the glass. My shoulders ached from the impact of the tray and the rail. Somewhere behind that collapsed archway, guards were working to contain a creature that should never have been in that hall to begin with. You could have run, she said finally. When I told you to move, and the creature blocked our path, you could have gone the other way, saved yourself. Didn't cross my mind. Why not? I thought about how to answer that honestly, the way I had thought about it once before in that same hall, hours earlier, when she asked what I would offer her if I had known to bring a gift. Because that's the job, I said. Not the fighting, the staying. Anybody can throw a punch when they're scared. Fewer people can stand still when running would be smarter. She looked at me for a long moment, dust in her hair, a thin cut above one eyebrow that a physician would need to look at soon, and something in her expression shifted from shock into something quieter and steadier. Every guest in that hall tonight, she said, spent the evening trying to prove they were worthy of my attention. Strength, lineage, gifts wrapped in suffering, all of it built to be seen. She gestured weakly toward the sealed archway behind us, toward the wreckage of a night that had gone from glittering to catastrophic in less than a minute. You did not perform for me tonight, you simply refused to leave. Wasn't trying to impress anybody, just didn't want you to get hurt. I know, she said. That is exactly why it worked. Guards were shouting further down the corridor, calling for medics, calling for containment teams, calling for order in a palace that had briefly forgotten what order looked like. Somewhere in the chaos, the Dravith prince was almost certainly explaining himself to furious officials, trying to justify a gift that had nearly cost a princess her life. I did not care about any of that. I sat on the cold floor with a bleeding hand and an aching shoulder, beside a princess who had just watched 100 performances fail and one plain refusal succeed. And for the first time all evening, the hall around us was finally completely quiet.